There is a difference between a man whose heart is beating and a man who is alive. Between a body moving through the world and a consciousness inhabiting it. Between existence and life. This distinction, which biology does not make, is one of the oldest concerns of philosophy, and Seneca pressed on it harder than almost anyone before or since. He was not being poetic. He was making an empirical observation about the people around him. Most of them, despite all biological evidence to the contrary, were not really there. They were present in body, absent in every way that mattered. They ate without tasting. They spoke without meaning it. They moved from one obligation to the next with the efficiency of mechanism and the awareness of a stone. Their lives were happening to them, in the way weather happens, surrounding them entirely, touching every surface, but registering as little more than ambient condition. Seneca would say of such people, without cruelty but with precision, they are already dead. Not metaphorically dead in the sense of dull or uncreative. Dead in the philosophical sense, they have stopped engaging with existence as something that requires their active participation. They have accepted the world's terms completely, hollowed out their own interiority to accommodate the demands of the external, and are now simply processing, stimuli arriving, responses being produced, the cycle continuing without any governing center. What animates them is not intention. It is momentum. The question this raises is, what does it mean to actually be alive? Seneca's answer is consistent across his letters, his essays, his tragedies. To be alive is to be conscious of your own situation with full honesty. To be aware that you are mortal. To be present in your own experience as an active witness rather than a passive recipient. To have, at the center of your daily existence, something that you have chosen and that you continue to choose, not just a habit or a role, but a genuine orientation toward what you believe a life is for. Most people do not have this. Not because they are incapable of it, but because no one pressed them to develop it, and the world makes it extremely easy to never do so. You can live, in the biological sense, for 80 years, filling each year with activity and relationship and even achievement, and never once stop to inhabit the experience rather than simply pass through it. The passing through is not nothing. There are pleasures in it. There are even forms of happiness. But it is not, by Seneca's standards, a life that has been genuinely lived. He distinguishes this from the question of what you do with your time. It is not that you must be a philosopher, a hermit, or a person of contemplative vocation. The craftsman who works with full attention is more alive, by this measure, than the senator who moves through great affairs in a daze of ambition and anxiety. The farmer who tends his land with genuine care and knowledge is more present than the merchant who has crossed the sea 100 times without ever once looking at it. What matters is not the content of your hours but the quality of your relationship to them. Whether you are there, in any meaningful sense, when they happen. What does it look like to be genuinely present in a life? Seneca suggests that it has certain recognizable qualities. A person who has truly lived can account for their time, not in the sense of a schedule, but in the sense of meaning. They can say what they have pursued and why. They can say what they have learned from suffering, not as a performance of resilience but as an actual report from experience taken seriously. They have relationships that carry real weight, because they were actually in them rather than managing them from a distance of self-protection. They have thoughts they arrived at themselves, through genuine contact with difficulty, rather than borrowed wholesale from the ambient culture. Contrast this with the person Seneca describes as merely existing. They cannot account for their time because it was never really theirs, it was always on loan, always spoken for, always borrowed from a future that was also borrowed. They have accumulated experience in the way a surface accumulates dust, passively, without engagement, without it changing anything essential. They have opinions they cannot trace to genuine reasoning. They have preferences they cannot explain in terms of actual values. They have, in the most fundamental sense, not yet showed up for their own lives. This is not a comfortable diagnosis, but Seneca is not a comfortable doctor. He writes to Lucilius not to soothe but to disturb, in the precise sense of stirring up, of making motion where there was stillness, of inserting urgency into what had been accepted as inevitable. His letters are an invitation to stop merely existing and start making actual contact with your life. What would that contact feel like? It would feel, first of all, like friction. The unexamined life is frictionless, things happen, you respond, the cycle continues. The examined life introduces resistance. You begin to ask why. You begin to notice the gap between what you claim to value and how you actually spend your days. You begin to feel the weight of choices that you had previously made without noticing you were making them. This friction is not comfortable, but it is the sensation of actually being present. Of being there, in your own existence, as a participant rather than a spectator. There is also something that Seneca describes as permanence. The person who has truly lived retains something from every experience because they were actually in it. Memory, for the person who was present, is not a list of events but a texture of lived time, specific, dimensional, irreducible. The person who was never quite present has a thinner archive. Things happened, but they did not land. They passed through without adhesion, and what remains is more like a record of having been somewhere than a real possession of the experience. Seneca invites you to ask the question without flinching, of the life you have lived so far, how much of it do you actually possess? How much of it left a mark that is really yours, that changed you, taught you, shaped the angle from which you see the world? How much was simply motion through time, with all the biological signs of life and none of the existential ones? The question is not asked to produce shame. It is asked because the remaining time can be different, if you choose it to be. Non est quod credas eos multum aegis ca multos occuprant annos. Do not think that those who have been busy for many years have achieved much. That was episode 6 of our Seneca series, on the shortness of life. Most men never live. They exist. They survive. They pass through, and call it a life. In episode 7, Seneca gives us the prescription, not for idleness, but for the only kind of activity that actually counts. Subscribe to StoicForge so you don't miss it. Like this video if Seneca made you think. This is StoicForge. Ancient wisdom. Modern edge.